everyone
Sounds
to
good.
the Bitcoin Magazine halving live stream. I'm joined here by Bitcoin OG, the one, the only, Aaron Voisine. Aaron,
Hello, hello.
thank you for joining us today for this
No problem.
celebration, this holiday. Can you kind of kick us off by telling us a little bit about who you are and your journey to Bitcoin, how you found it?
Sure. So I'm a software developer, and I've been living in Silicon Valley for 20 years, and came out actually during the first dot-com bubble, and worked for a string of different startups, and became really interested in iOS and iPhone development when the iPhone came out, and had a few successful apps, and then around that time, I was trying to figure out what was going on with the economy with the 2008 financial crisis, and trying to understand that. I started studying economics and monetary history and monetary theory, and the more I learned about how the banking system worked, the more horrified I became that like I was shocked that it hadn't collapsed a lot sooner. Like it was it was like how did it last as long as it did? This is insane.
It's impressive, actually.
And
it's impressive.
Yeah. It really is. It's like all held together with baling wire and chewing gum and duct tape, and they managed to keep it going somehow, which was really surprising. And I became convinced that like digital cash could actually solve a lot of the problems that arose from the way how the banking system evolved, and then when I heard about Bitcoin, the more I read about it and understood what it was, the more I became convinced that that was the solution, and that it had the potential to potentially, replace the entire global monetary system eventually. And I thought that was extremely important. And if it happened, it would be the most important thing that had happened in my lifetime, even bigger than the internet itself. And so I decided to focus on that, and to dedicate the rest of my career to try to help make that happen by building better tools. At the time, the Bitcoin software that was out there was pretty poor, and I thought, with my experience in mobile developments and software development generally, that I had an opportunity to make something that was better than what was out there at the time, and it seems like it's caught on and become popular. So.
You could say that for sure. Well, so we're going to return back to this point about how you got started in that environment. But I want to ask you about, you're an OG. This is your third halving. When you reflect back on previous halvings, how do you see them in retrospect? Like, what's the meaning? Why does the halving have meaning to you, I guess? And when you look forward, what do you expect we'll be talking about at the next epoch? What do you think happens over the next 4 years?
Sure. I think, hopefully, ideally, Bitcoin, maybe not good for journalists, but Bitcoin should get more and more boring over time and just become, this staid, kind of reliable, dependable, monetary base that the people don't really think about, but they just use every day. Like people aren't, when people start talking about the Federal Reserve, it's usually because something bad they're doing something terrible.
Sure.
They're like, ideally they want to keep a low profile and have nobody pay attention to them at all. And I think Bitcoin will eventually get there. It'll just be something that everybody uses every day and they don't even think about it. But definitely in the past, halving events have had a huge impact on the price. Indirectly, but I think that each halving that goes by, the direct effect of reducing the supply of Bitcoin that's getting mined has a smaller and smaller effect, obviously, because like we're cutting if you look at like the amount of the supply that's being introduced, that's getting cut in half, and see how big that is compared to the existing stock of Bitcoin. Sure. As we go forward, that reduction in new supply is very small compared to the overall supply of Bitcoin that already exists. Whereas like in the first halving, there wasn't very much Bitcoin in existence, and a huge amount of the supply was what was getting mined every day. it was a much larger percentage of like the existing stock of Bitcoin. And so when that first halving happened, that's when the price went from like, $7 or $10 up to $200 shot up. And that was, what made me like, I working on Bitcoin at the time, but that was what made me drop everything and focus on Bitcoin full time, because it was happening a lot faster than I was expecting. I thought, oh, this is something that's going to happen over the next 50 years. And then when, the price went up 20x in like a period of a month, I was like, oh, it's happening right now. So if I want to be a part of this, I better drop everything and focus on it.
Totally. So, I find it's interesting, like the price is such a magnet for people's attention and curiosity and interest. I mean, it's like the best marketing that money can buy, so to speak. And so,
Absolutely.
And it's interesting, every halving, when it drives a new all-time high, it seems like it introduces a new wave of users that are unique and distinct from the last wave somehow. And so, when I first got in, I got involved in late 2012. It was, the first technologists kind of coming, developers coming, people who wanted to build things, libertarians. The subsequent halving, it changed. It's had a level of credibility and professionalism, that it's institutions, it's funds, it's banks, it's really kind of the smartest people in the room in the legacy financial system. What do you expect for this next halving? What does the next wave of users look like? What are you seeing at BRD that is telling you about what's coming next?
Well, certainly, we're seeing, we're a consumer app, so we're seeing a lot of consumer adoption, and things are growing, and it seems like they're accelerating. Our particular customer base is mostly people who trade, I think, actively. And that's why, like, we tend to see big jumps in new users when there's volatility in the price. And so that's that's kind of what we're seeing for our product. But I think that, for Bitcoin generally, what we're seeing is just more investors. First, it was like the investors who were interested in extremely volatile, extremely risky, high risk, high return types of investments who were getting involved in cryptocurrency trading.
You mean? I think the technical term is gamblers.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe one step below gamblers, because it's it's what we in Silicon Valley like to call an asymmetric bet.
Yeah.
So
calculated gamblers.
have you heard this term? So an asymmetric bet is something where if you're gambling, the house has an edge. If you gamble long enough, you're going to lose. But an asymmetric bet is a bet where, you might have a 90% chance of losing all your money, but you have a 10% chance of making 100 times your money back. And that's an asymmetric bet where it's very risky, and you're most likely going to lose everything. But that one time out of 10, you're not going to make 10 times your money. You make back 100 times your money. And that's, I think, the way that, at least right now, I think certainly in the early days, and maybe less so now, but I think it's still the case that that's the way, if you're investing in Bitcoin, you should view it. It is risky, but the potential payoff is much higher than the risk. So it has maybe a 50% chance of failing, but a 50% chance of going up 10 times, of increasing in value by 10x. And you'll take that bet every day. If you could place that bet over and over, that's how investors get rich, is by taking risky but asymmetric bets.
Sure.
That's how Silicon Valley investors make a lot of money.
Right. Yeah. Well, kind of to your point earlier, I think when you include a value system that's not just financial, but also a moral value system of, the legacy system is broken and it hurts a lot of people, it makes the bet even worth it so much more. It's like, it's worth failing at something that's, it's something worth failing for. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Bitcoin is something worth failing for, Well,
well,
go on.
Well, I could continue on that topic. I think it's kind of an interesting one. If you think about like, um, if the legacy system does fail, then what will people switch to, right? And I think the competitors for the existing system are maybe going back to the gold standard or something like Bitcoin. And those are I think the current system can't last indefinitely. It will collapse eventually. Um, Although they do seem to find ways to keep it limping along every time that it starts to fall apart. But I don't think that can continue indefinitely. And when it does fall apart, people are going to go to the next best alternative. So that might be Bitcoin, or it might be gold, or something
Mm-hmm.
else. And
I
also
go on.
I was going to say also, just the mere existence of an alternative can also help accelerate the collapse of the old system.
Totally.
When people start to get fearful, and they have an exit path, and they have a place to pull their wealth out of the old system and put it into something new, that relief valve can precipitate the bubble collapsing.
Yeah, in fact, it's almost like the bubble can't collapse without it, because when it's an interesting time to be having this conversation, because the financial crisis and the depression that's really gripping the world right now, even though it doesn't quite feel the same as the '08 depression did,
Sure.
the world is a dollar world, and there's no escape from the dollar system. I mean, it's like, where do you go? Like, and at the end of the day, as long as the American military is out on the streets, and as long as there's nowhere else for you to go, people are stuck into the monetary policy regime of Washington, D.C., which I can't even imagine a more dysfunctional place in the world than Washington, D.C. And, you look at, like, what are the other options out there? You mentioned gold, there's Bitcoin, but I mean, let's be honest, Bitcoin's got a long ways to go if it's going to be the global currency of the world. And you have maybe the Chinese RMB, but like, there's not a lot of options out there. I mean, and the need has never really been more urgent.
Sure. And RMB is, it's modeled after, it's the same kind of fiat banking system, central banking currency system that's, using a debt-based system that the U.S. dollar is. It's, it's a different currency, and it's run by different people, but it's the same model.
Yeah. Different mobsters, same scam.
Exactly.
So, I wanted to kind of return back, I guess, as kind of maybe the last topic we touch on, to how you got started in Bitcoin, and trying to get to the roots of where the '08 crisis came from. And honestly, that's the exact same intellectual journey I went on that brought me here. It's how I found Dr. Ron Paul, my hero, and was exposed to a whole world of ideology that I didn't know about. That is happening right now around the world. I mean, in the United States, I don't know what it's like for everyone who's listening to this live stream. We have 35 million people that have lost their jobs in the last 6 weeks. There's going to be a lot of reflection from people trying to understand, how do we have a system that's so fragile? What would be your words of encouragement, or what, if you could take a lesson that you've learned over this journey so far and pass it on to a new generation of future Bitcoiners? How would you advise them to get started and position for themselves to be part of this movement? And what would you caution them against? If you could take the number one mistake that you've learned from, that you wish you had known at the beginning rather than now, what would you pass on?
Yeah, I would just say that, in order to, it might be difficult with the way the system is now, where, everybody is up to their eyeballs in debt and student loans and living paycheck to paycheck. But, do whatever you can to start, building assets a little bit at a time, and, consume less than what you're earning, and start putting it away and preparing for a situation where the system isn't stable, and you need to have assets socked away to protect yourself and your family. So
well, how'd you decide when you were like getting started that, building a wallet was where you wanted to plant your flag? What was the sign to you that you had found the business you wanted to commit to?
Well, that's an interesting story. I was using an early web wallet, and I had bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at the time in 2012, which was about 80 Bitcoins, I think. And I was on a bad Wi-Fi connection, and I thought, it didn't occur to me that it might not sync the private key with the web server. And it popped up with a Bitcoin address, and I sent 80 Bitcoins to it, and I closed the web window, and I was on a bad Wi-Fi connection, and so it didn't sync the private key to the server. And as soon as I closed the web window, those 80 Bitcoins were gone forever, and that made me, pretty irritable. I was pretty upset about that, and I thought, if Bitcoin is going to be successful, I know it has, this potential to be like the most important thing that happens in my life. And it's not going to get there with crappy software like this that makes elementary mistakes that lose people money. So I thought, I had an idea of how to build one better, and so that's, it was out of a personal need for software that I could use for myself and for my own needs. That's really what it came from.
So I feel like the lesson to extract from that is envision the world in which Bitcoin is the currency that we need, and what are the things that are keeping it from being there, and tackle those relentlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's early in the space, and to get where we need to go, if you're in a position where or have familiarity with the needs of people who should be adopting Bitcoin but aren't because the tools aren't there or the institutions aren't there, then yeah, that's definitely the right place to go.
Well, Aaron, thank you for being on this journey. Thank you for building a great product, and thank you for 3 halvings. I look forward to hanging out with you again on the 4th one.
Okay, great.
All right, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.